Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I'm Guido Boffetta, University of Torino and INFN. And so I will present the title is a little bit changed, Rayleigh-Taylor mixing in porous media. First of all, let me thank the organizer for this nice, interesting conference. I was able to follow only yesterday morning, unfortunately, because being at home has some compromise. One has to make some compromise. So one slide of motivation. I don't need to motivate you about the importance of Rayleigh-Taylor mixing in general, but in porous media, there are several applications for example, in geophysical flow and technological application. The most important one probably is for CO2 carbon dioxide sequestration in saline aquifer, which is water saturated with brine, which is below some permeable rock. And so the idea is that when you pump at high pressure CO2 into brine, in principle, CO2, the carbon dioxide is lighter, but then it dissolves into brine and makes the brine more dense. And so we have a gravitational instability, Rayleigh-Taylor instability that moves the CO2 saturated brine towards the bottom of the aquifer. And this helps the sequestration. So it's very important for this application. This application is already used. For example, this is one facility in Europe done by Lacroix, managed by Total. For this reason, for the importance, there have been several experiments in the lab about Rayleigh-Taylor convection or similar convection in porous media. And here are three examples. This one is from the group of Andevit, and it's really carbon dioxide in salt water. But other experiments, like for example the one by Bobecki, use different liquids. For example, water with glycol or sugar also. So the main difference is that carbon dioxide is only partially miscible with water, while the other case were fully miscible. But all the experiments are done in 2 dimensions because it's more practical to take images. So it is not really in porous media, but it's in a LSO cell, which means a very thin layer of fluid with two glasses around, which has the same equation we will show you in the next slide, of the porous media, but is in 2 dimensions. Keep in mind that 2 dimension, we show that the dimensionality matters in this problem. So for the study of this problem, we use the most simple setup, which is a standard configuration of Rayleigh-Taylor. So we have 2 layers of fluid of different density. The heavy layer is in the top of a light layer in the presence of gravity. So this is unstable. And the density differences between the 2 density difference define the Atwood number. We assume that the Atwood number is small, so we can assume that we can use the Boussinesq approximation for an incompressible fluid. So we have incompressible flow, sorry. So we have that the density is transported by the velocity field, which is incompressible, and then we have a diffusivity D with the standard diffusivity term. Okay, so the velocity itself, because we are in a porous media, we use the simplest model, which is the Darcy model. So the velocity is given by the combination of the pressure and the buoyancy forces with this parameter in front, which is given in terms of the permeability. I remind you the permeability is the size, is typically the square size of the grain, the microscopic grain that compose your porous media. Phi is the porosity, which is the fraction of liquid in the volume, and mu is the viscosity of the fluid. Okay, combining this parameter with G, one obtains a characteristic velocity for the process, which has this expression W naught, and this is important because we will use to make dimensionless the result. Okay, and also we can define the characteristic time. And then, important, with the characteristic velocity, we can define the Peclet number of the problem, which as usual is the ratio between the advection and the diffusive term. And we will use Peclet, very large Peclet, because we have in mind the application of the dimension in which the Peclet is very, very large. Okay, the Reynolds number is small, but the Peclet number is large. So this setup is very well studied and known. For example, the linear stability analysis for the porous, the Darcy, what we can call the Darcy-Rayleigh-Taylor problem, was done already by Safran and Taylor many years ago. I don't want to enter in the details, but just the important point that, as usual in this kind of analysis, there is a more unstable modes. So the LD represents the wavelength of the instability, of the linear instability, most unstable linear instability, and it will be used in the following. Okay, so from the result, you see that the Peclet number can be also written as the ratio between the macroscopic scale and the stability scale, which is typically much smaller than the first one, so the Peclet is large. Okay, so we use direct numerical simulation, three-dimensional numerical simulation to study the Darcy-Rayleigh-Taylor system with different Peclet number. In our case, it's very large, pretty large. We use a fully parallel pseudospectral code. So this is a snapshot, three-dimensional snapshot of the density field at a certain time. So you see heavy and light fluid, and you see these plumes or finger, density finger, which define the mixing layer as a usual Rayleigh-Taylor turbulence. This is a movie of a vertical section of the density field, and you see how the finger of high density goes down and light density goes up and invades all the domain. Okay, I want to repeat because you see that at the beginning the plume, the finger are very small at the stability scale, and they grows in time, both in the vertical and horizontal direction. So from the density field at different time, you can compute the vertical density profile. Okay, so this is a function of the vertical theta. The theta is the density. At the beginning, we have a step profile, very sharp, and then during the evolution, because of the mixing layer, this profile becomes shallow. And but evolution, you can see already from these pictures, is similar in time. So we have always the same profile, which is simply rescaled, and so we can use a very simple nonlinear diffusive model, which we introduced many years ago for the standard Rayleigh-Taylor problem, to fit this profile. The model is very simple. It's a polynomial approximation of the third order, but it fits very, very well this profile. And in this way, we are able to define the extension of the mixing layer, which is just this theta1 parameter in the fitting line. So we can measure the extension of the mixing layer without threshold, without some arbitrary definition. Okay, and so we compute how the mixing layer grows in time, and this is the result. This is the extension of the mixing layer as a function of time for the three simulations of three different diffusivity, and you see very clearly that it grows linear in time. This is the big difference with respect to the standard Rayleigh-Taylor problem, in which they grow quadratically in time. So the growth is proportional to this W naught, which I defined before, and there is a dimensionless coefficient here, which can be determined by fitting this line or by taking the time derivatives, and we measure that alpha is about 1.06 with still some weak dependency on the diffusivity, on the Peclet number. Okay, and so this is a measure of the growth of the vertical growth of the finger, but also from this picture, you see that also horizontal size of the finger grows in time. And so in order to study how this grows in time, we use the autocorrelation function of the density field on an horizontal plane. So this is an example of the autocorrelation function, which decay very fast. So from the first zero crossing, we use to define the extension or the horizontal size. And so this is how the horizontal size grows in time, and you see it's different. It's qualitatively different. Now it's not linear anymore, but like the square root of t. So we have a diffusive growth in the horizontal direction. So in horizontal direction, it grows with the square root of t. In the vertical direction, like t. So it means that the evolution of finger in this problem is not self-similar, but they change in shape. They became more elongated. And so this is another difference with respect to standard Rayleigh-Taylor turbulence. So the efficiency of mass transfer, the mass transfer is the density, how the density transported from one reservoir to the other, is quantified as usual in terms of the Nusselt number, which is defined by sorry, I don't know what I did. It's defined as the correlation between the vertical velocity and the density normalized with the diffusivity as a function of the Darcy-Rayleigh number. The Darcy-Rayleigh number is essentially the usual Darcy number times the Rayleigh number times the Darcy number, which is the permeability over the size square. Okay, so in any case, we expect from a dimensional argument that an asymptotic regime, which is the ultimate regime for this problem, in which the Nusselt number is linear with the Rayleigh number, and we did find that our data for large Rayleigh follow very, very close this prediction. Linear prediction, we're able to compute the coefficient, which is something like 0.03. Okay, and so far I discussed three-dimensional simulation, but since we have seen that most of the experiments are done in 2D, we also did some two-dimensional simulation. And so these are the results. This is the snapshot at a certain time of the density feed from a 2D and 3D simulation with exactly the same parameter and the same initial condition. But you see there are some differences. Okay, in the two dimension, the finger, the plume are more coherent and more elongated. So indeed, if we compute the evolution of the mixing layer in three-dimensional simulation, as I showed before, follow these three lines. In two dimension, also the growth is linear, but is faster, much faster than three dimension. Okay, so the finger are longer and thinner. And also you see from the color plot, they are more coherent, so more efficient to transport density from one side to the other. And indeed, if you compute the Nusselt number at a fixed Rayleigh number, you see that in two dimensions, the Nusselt number is much bigger than in three dimensions. So there are quantitative difference, I would say, with respect to the two cases. So in order to understand better what is the origin of the difference, we decided to perform a systematic study in which you consider now a domain which has a transfer direction Ly that change from very small, and so we recover when Ly is very small, we recover the two-dimensional limit. When it's wide of the same order of Lx, we recover the three-dimensional limit, and we want to understand what happens in between as we increase the extension of the Ly. And so we use a dimensionless parameter that is the ratio between this confining direction and the stability scale of the finger, LD, that I defined before. Okay, so if we look, for example, the first statistics is the growth of the mixing layer. We see that for small thickness, all the simulation with a small thickness, so in this region here, they collapse on the same line, which is the two-dimensional line, while almost all the simulation for large thickness, they collapse to another line, which is the three-dimensional line. And so for intermediate thickness, we find something which is interesting, that, for example, this simulation yellow, which is for intermediate scale, it starts following the three-dimensional line, but at a certain point we have a crossover with a different slope that follows the two-dimensional line. So it means that if the confinement is very small, we have a two-dimensional behavior. It's very large three-dimensional behavior. For intermediate confinement, we observe a transition in time from 3D to 2D. And this is even more clear if we look at the RMS of the vertical velocity. Okay, the vertical velocity reaches a stationary state, which is of order W naught. And in two dimension is faster, so all the line collapse on this higher plateau. In three dimension, we have another plateau. And for this intermediate run, we see very clear that there is a transition time which moves from three dimension to two dimension. So what I want to tell you in the few minutes that I have now, I forgot to show you the inset here. So the transition is remarkably sharp, okay? So this is the alpha, so it's the slope of this line, the efficiency, how the mixing layer grows in time as a function of the confinement scale. And you see there is a plateau for two dimension, a plateau for three dimension, and there is a kind of phase transition, a very sharp transition from two dimension to three dimension, and the same for the velocity, okay? So we want to understand why we have this crossover from 2D and 3D, and we find at the end a very simple geometrical argument that I will try to explain you in this, which is probably the last slide. So the idea is that, okay, when R, the confinement scale, is smaller than the stability scale at which the finger bores, the finger already, they are generated already in a two-dimensional setup. So they follow a two-dimensional behavior. When this is very large, okay, there is no confinement, so we expect to have a three-dimensional behavior. For intermediate R, so at the beginning, we have that R is larger than 1, order of 5, 6. We have that at the beginning, The plumes are generated on a scale which are smaller than the confinement scale, so they can accommodate on different layers, like in 3 dimensions. But then, since they grow in time, at a certain point, they saturate the transfer direction, and so they behave like in 2-dimensional setup. So if this argument is true, we have a very simple prediction that the transition time is proportional. By comparing these two, the transition time is proportional to the confinement scale to the power 2, or the confinement number R2 square. And this is indeed confirmed if you look at the transition time for the different run which display the transition. There is one that have the transition a very short time. We see this is compatible. Our results are compatible with this R square law. Okay, this is the end of the talk. Let me give very briefly the conclusion. We performed a numerical simulation of Rayleigh-Taylor mixing in porous media. We found that the mixing layer grows in agreement with the dimensional prediction, so linear, and we have a diffusive growth of the horizontal size. We observe the ultimate state relation for the Nusselt-Rayleigh relation, which is in this case is linear. But what's important is the effect of dimensionality. This is somehow surprising because you expect that in porous media dimension do not play any role because you have a porous that in some sense decouple the flow in the bulk with respect to the boundary. But we found there are qualitatively 2D and 3D are qualitatively similar, but with important quantitative differences. So in 2D, everything seems to be accelerated. So if you want to take home message from this talk is do not use 2-dimensional result for 3-dimensional application. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you want some more details on the result, you can have a look to this paper. Thank you.
Thank you for this great talk. So I can tell you that there are so many hands up. So we will start.
The porous media is typically very layered, and the diffusivity can be differ by factors of 10 or 100, horizontal or vertical. I was wondering if you thought about how that would affect your answers.
No, thank you. So we are using the simplest model in which the porosity is just a scalar. So you know that the porosity can be a tensor, so can be anisotropic, and also the diffusivity can be different in different directions. You are perfectly right. No, we didn't check yet. This is something that we plan to do in the future, to have more realistic model for the velocity field. So more realistic model of the porous media. This is very interesting, I think.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I always thought that there was a problem with using Darcy's law for unsteady calculations because the permeability is a function of pressure, and unless you know how to describe the permeability as a function of pressure, then I would say there is a problem there. I am interested in how you dealt with that issue.
No, of course, as I explained before, we use a constant permeability. Yeah, you're right. But keep in mind that we are working in a Boussinesq approximation, so the density variation is small, very small, and so we can assume maybe that also the pressure variation is not too large, no? So I'm not sure if the variability of permeability.
I don't know about that. I think it's something to be checked, right?
Yeah.
For self-consistency.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. No, sure. The model is the simplest model we can have in mind. Okay. This is the Darcy model.
I've encountered problems like this. I think there's an ambiguity in what you mean by 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional. The glass, because it's whether it's 2-dimensional in real space or Fourier space. Because if it's 2-dimensional in Fourier space, that means there's no k vector, or k vector is 0, and so it should be infinite. Translationally invariable in that direction. So 2 glass plates together actually has strong boundary conditions, and it's more like a delta function. It's the opposite of being 2-dimensional. It's extremely 3-dimensional.
Okay, I'm not sure that I understand your question. So there is one important difference between the simulation and the possible real experiments. we have periodic boundary condition in both X and Y direction. So also, even when we confine the flow, we don't have a no-slip boundary condition on this side, on the Y side. Okay, so two-dimension means that you do not have wave number in Fourier space, if you want. You don't have wave number larger than the scale at which you confine. Okay, so this is the unique constraint that you put in the system. But I agree with you. I don't think this is so, I'm not sure this is so important in the case of porous media. But if you study, for example, a bulk flow without, so a usual Navier-Stokes equation, when you confine in one direction, the boundary conditions that you put are very, very important, of course. In this case, in any case, we have periodic boundary condition in both directions. Okay, so if this was the question.
I agree with you entirely that two-dimensional results in Rayleigh-Taylor may not be applicable in three-dimensional results, like directly applicable, and I have two sides. So the discontinuity of dimensional crossover, actually transition from 2D to 3D, for not in porous media, but just say in ideal fluids or maybe like realistic fluids, it was showed theoretically, maybe, I don't know, some 20, 30 years ago, whether you tried to compare or to look at these results. It's first question. And second, there were the experiments of Meshkov in, it's not porous media, but this was more complicated than just a fluid, it was a jelly experiment when he was investigating the effect of concentration of gelatin in these jelly experiments, showing that depending on the concentration, behavior, and transition from 2D to 3D may be quite different. Have you looked at that?
No, of course not.
Neither, right?
Yeah.
Neither on the theory and an experiment.
Sure. Now we have a collaboration. I can mention that we have a collaboration with a group in France. They do experiment in 3 dimensions. Okay, it's not a real porous media. It's something which is more macroscopic. They use beads, glass beads, and they use a fluid which match with matching refractive index. And so in that case, they are able to produce a result in 3 dimensions. So we are planning to compare our result with their experiments.
Okay, I have a quick question. Did you consider stochastic random fluctuations at the interface, or interface completely deterministic?
No, at the beginning, to trigger the stability, we put some random noise on the interface. This is helped to trigger the stability. Okay, we have 2 different kinds of perturbation. One, we use a perturbation interface superimposing several waves, okay, a different wave number with random phase. And the other case, we put some noise in the density itself. So the interface is not well defined, but this is very, very small. It's just a small perturbation, which is not infinitesimal, but order 10 to the minus, order relative, I think 10 to the minus 4, something like that. So can change the first stage of the stability, but with different perturbation, we see that after the initial stage, then the evolution is the same. Also, alpha doesn't seem to change too much, which is maybe another difference with respect to the standard Rayleigh-Taylor, which alpha depends. It seems that depends on the initial perturbation.
Are there any more questions? We have. Okay. I think, thank you very much, Guido, for this great talk and for giving space for question and answers part. So I will